Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a wonderful day. I seem to be a little bit relaxed and subdued right now. That's because I just ate. So I'm in the hibernation mode. like like when the bears eat something and they go sleep for the rest of the cold time of the year. Or the crocodile who eats something and then flips down, or a lion after a hunt wants to rest. Well, actually, my hunt didn't go further than a can of soup. I hunted a can of soup in the kitchen, and it wasn't that much an effort. Even it didn't even have to use a can opener. It had one of these dealies that you just flip and pull out. So my hunt was very civilized, and my soup was pea soup, not the pea that you think. Pea soup, very vegetarian thingy. And not because I don't eat meat, I do, not so much sometimes, but it just wasn't available and I didn't feel like cooking. So now that we got that out of the way, so let me share with you a thought for you to ponder. Have you wondered why is it that sometimes, without really intention of it, our thoughts goes towards something violent, like an unpleasant encounter or unpleasant story or something that happened, and then we think of it and then we make other scenarios in our thoughts about it, and then we before we know it, it's like suddenly we have traveled far away from the starting point, which was just a notion of dissatisfaction with somebody or some event or something, or remembered something useless or unpleasant or negative or something. But suddenly we made build it up to a whole book, and we find ourselves traveling in a road that we didn't intend to, and that road just brings in more of a, negative stuff and violent, and it's not about the violent part. It was just a thing that is undesirable. We didn't intend it to. It's not bringing better mood for us. So it just happens to be there. So for that, I think perhaps it's because the theory that there's only violence may be truth to it. Meaning, we always hear about non-violent approach, non-violent demonstrations, non-violent this way or that way. But in fact, there is only violent. I mean, we are violent people, and let's deal with that rather than trying to deal with non-violent. In other words, let's deal with what reality of human being is, which from the time that it was created, all we know of human being has been violence in its interaction with the nature, in its interaction with the beasts around, with the animals who were also, at least at some level and part of them, violent. So it's been reacting to violence and reacting to his needs in a violent way. Had to kill an animal to eat. So to feed himself was an act of violence. To defend himself from whatever was happening was violent. The nature showed him violent. So his nature, the Big Bang, they say, well, it was a violent act, Big Bang. And the rest of it, the volcanic reactions and tsunamis and all the other atmospheric events and meteors and other kinds of disasters that we've been, earthquakes and so on, all have represented a violent existence of beginning, at least at the beginning. And perhaps we were part of that environment and was maybe not created as violent, but became violent, or saw that the instinct of violence was fed because of the environment, the violent environment that we were living in. So, hence, everything we did, whether it was genetic or whether it was acquired by living in an environment of violence, became violence. And we seem to have forgotten that we are violent by nature, and we keep talking about non-violent as if it is something, an option that we can simply choose, instead of dealing with violence and understanding what that is, and understanding that this is not an era to be violent, to use violence, and to learn to become someone who can see no use for violence. Rather than having the violence and choosing non-violence, let's make it to be what our nature should really be. Not as non-violent, which means we are violent, so we are doing non-violent, as a character and a species who doesn't seem violence as a trait, as an attribute, as a characteristics, as a way to solve anything, as a way to choose. The earth is not at the Big Bang time anymore. The tsunamis are not as they were maybe at that time. The volcanic reactions and fire and earthquakes and all the changes and movements and so on are not as violent as it was at the time of the birth of the earth, or this universe. Therefore, even if we were violent or created violent or became part of our environment which was violent at the time, it is not now. The environment, the earth itself, is not as violent as it used to be. The number of disasters and so on are not as much, for whatever reason. I'm sure we didn't have anything to do with it, but the nature itself, possibly, it seems like maybe it's not as much. I may be wrong, but I'm just, spitballing here. just that's how it seems to me. But the one thing that has remained violent and did not travel in its own characteristics and attributes and behavior, as the nature itself perhaps changed, or at least not as much, is us. We humans are increasing our violence, which I don't think it's in harmony with the rate that the nature itself has changed its level of violence to more or lesser. I don't believe it's more now. I don't believe nature's violence is as much as 2 million years ago was. So obviously it's been diminished, reduced. But I see our violence, human beings' violence, in our treatment of other people, other nations, in our greed level, that we go to expand, regardless of which nation we are talking about, or any particular nation, just in general, we seem to be having this expansion ideas, controlling ideas, ownership of the world, and creating violence, and through violence achieving what we think is something we should achieve. We're talking about a greater field of movement in the world, on all fronts, all nations, a human being as a mentality and entity and behavior in general. So I think we have remained violent while the nature has become not as violent. And therefore, I think we are not in harmony with the universe, with the nature, as it has been evolving, but we think we have been evolving, but we have instead increased our violence. Look at the wars that in such civilized, technologically civilized era is more than the wars that and it's in its size and destruction more than the wars that we have read in histories. So we can conclude that we are a bunch of nincompoops, a bunch of violent people. So what is it that it has also remained in our thoughts, and our thoughts are on daily basis are being pulled in towards some scenarios that we make and keep our mind occupied with unpleasant negative behavior. So it means we need to bring more tranquility and ability to decrease the ripples and movements of thoughts in the field of our consciousness, and turn our consciousness filled with more of a relaxing and strong abilities to coordinate and harmonize with the flow of loving nature, loving part of nature, than we have. Which brings us to the discussion of meditation, which in meditation we learn how to bring our mind, which is flying all over the place and scattered all around, and like the thought in a library, like one book in a library, which seems like the number of the books in a library, there are so many of them, and every one of them seems to be opening and closing and creating some kind of a new subject for a person who doesn't know which book to read, and he goes and opens one and then reads a little bit and closes and opens one and closes. So constantly is moving about because he hasn't found the book he wants to read. It's like a wanderer who's wandering around, doesn't have a home. He goes to this street, that street, beach here and there, and is in touch and is influenced by all kinds of things and events, fights, and possibly witnessing crimes, and witnessing drug use, and witnessing maybe somewhere is a party, and maybe somewhere is a traffic jam, and somewhere is a traffic, and somewhere is peace, and somewhere is dirt, and somewhere is disgusting things, somewhere is restaurants, somewhere is, because the wanderer has no home and sees and goes to all these streets and sees all these things happening. And our mind's the same. If it doesn't have a place to rest and focus and relax and be as its home until it's then needed to be used by us, to be called on to do something for us, to contemplate on something or whatever task we give it, if it doesn't have a place to be, it will be like the wanderer, like the person in the library who doesn't know which book to read. It goes here and there, so on, which possibly then turns our possible memory of negative event into a scenario that I just explained at the beginning of this production, goes to the path and to the stories that we never intended to make. So then we come to understand the importance of learning how to meditate, to teach the mind that it has a place to focus. Like my thumb has a place to be here, my fingers are here, my wrist is here, my elbow is here, my shoulder is here, my nose here, my ears here, my eyes here. I know where everything of my body is located in my body. And the mind and body were originally one when we were supposedly put together. But then the two opposing forces of negative and positive appeared, and suddenly we seem to be having two entities. Now, but still our mind is part of our existence, part of our entity, part of our being. So therefore, mind, which is part of our being, our entity, our one entity, like any other part of my body, which I know where they are, where they're hanging, where they're residing, should have a place in my body. And unfortunately, our mind doesn't seem to have been taught where its place is to be hanging around waiting for me to be used. So like my hand is hanging around here, and when I want to shake hand, it goes here and I shake hand. I don't go look for my hand to bring it here and then shake hand and use it. It's there for me waiting around. The mind, though, however, is all over the place. So when I want to do something, I got to collect it from wherever the hell it is, and then focus it and put it on the math problems that I want to solve, or on the book that I want to read, or on the subject that I want to pay attention to. And that is not efficient. The mind should also have a place in my body, should know where to be and where to rest and where to relax. And through meditation, I can teach the mind to have its own place, which in other discussion discussed where it is, and we can further develop on that later. And when we have a place for our mind will be used to over time, through meditation and learning this technique, that it needs to be there. And so it won't be wandering around, it won't be creating stories, it won't be attracted to negative thinking, or it won't be lured into thinking about negative things. It won't be fooled into creating negative stuff or elaborating on it or expanding on it. And it won't be all over the place. It will be collected, calm, and strong and powerful, waiting for us to be called upon. Like our horse, saddled up, ready, fed, ready to go for us to go jump on it and go with it, rather than the horse being all around the place, and every time we want it, we got to go grab it, find it here, where it is, bring it here, and then saddle up and use it. The mind, by nature, is a wanderer, and we should teach it how not to be a wanderer and become a strong entity, reliable and available whenever it's needed to be called upon. We'll discuss this a little bit further later on. At this point, just ponder on it and look forward to your opinions. Talk to you soon, and thank you.